Hi everyone, it's Rukshan here and welcome to the second episode of Real Time with Rukshan. Today I'm going to be talking about a very controversial issue. I don't know whether it should be controversial, but of course it's become controversial in our community, and that is to do with gender rights, biology, men or male or female, how it pertains to women's rights, male rights, the rights of people who are gay and lesbian in our community. This issue has become very controversial over the past few months in Australia, but of course it's been happening for a long time all around the world. And a lot of the times when I talk about this issue, one of the main things that people say to me is, Rukshan, you're not actually an expert in this issue. You shouldn't be talking about this. Or sometimes people will say to me, Rukshan, you're actually a guy. What would you know about women's rights? These are the kind of complaints that I get when I try to discuss this issue. And I think everyday people, we kind of understand anatomy, our biology. We know what a male is. We know what a female is. All around the world, this kind of understanding has existed since the beginning of time. But now these things are being challenged. And maybe this is why that people are telling me that I'm no longer an expert in what is very kind of human to all of us. So to kind of put all this into perspective for me, I've decided to actually get an expert to come along and help me understand some of this. And that is our guest today, Assistant Professor in Political Philosophy at the Melbourne University, Holly Lawford-Smith. Welcome.
Hi.
Tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to studying philosophy, political philosophy.
Oh, that's a long way back. I guess I just discovered philosophy. I took it by accident at university just as an experiment and fell in love with it. And then I guess I've just been doing it since then, which is some 23 years now. And I guess I sort of wandered into moral, political, social philosophy type topics, again, kind of by accident. But I suppose I like the way that they bring the sort of abstract, head in the sky nature of philosophy together with some sort of real world issues. So you can't get like too far caught up in whether you're a brain in a vat. You have to think a bit about some real legal questions or social questions. So it's kind of just where I landed. Yeah.
Yeah. And you've been doing this for how many years now?
So I got my first professional academic job in 2012. I was a lecturer at the University of Sheffield in the UK. And then I came back to the University of Melbourne as a senior lecturer. And then I was promoted a couple of years ago to associate professor. And so that's where I still am, University of Melbourne.
Yeah. And what's, I guess, the difference between how do you become a professor? Is it associate professor? Professor, what's the tangible difference for someone that doesn't know?
Oh, it's basically just like any internal workplace climbing of the ladder. Yeah. So, you have to meet a bunch of metrics and publish a certain amount and be good enough at teaching and whatever.
I was just curious.
Professor is the highest status one and the one that everyone's aspiring to, but it's quite hard to get. So I'm the rank before that and obviously aspiring upwards. Yep.
And so as a professor in political philosophy, associate professor,
yeah,
covering these kind of topics which I was just discussing in my introduction, how did you get involved in the current debate that's going in our community? What's your involvement in it? Yeah,
as a discipline, political philosophy is pretty broad, as is moral philosophy, and I wasn't actually working on anything to do with sex or gender before I moved back to Melbourne. I did stuff on, what is the state? What's the role of a citizen in the state? And when the state does bad things, who's responsible for that and how? I did a bit of stuff on climate ethics. Kind of dabbling in a whole range of different topics, and didn't really find feminist philosophy very appealing in my minimal contact that I'd had with it. But in 2018, so that I'd been back here for 2 years, this whole issue over the reform of the Gender Recognition Act in the UK just really blew up. They were having a consultation on whether to move from, I think it's a 2 years living as they say gender you wish to acquire model. They were talking about moving from that to self-identification, statutorily declared. And a philosopher, again, some of your audience might have heard of, called Kathleen Stock, who's a professor at Sussex at the time. She wrote an essay for Medium, kind of poking the bear at the feminist philosophers. Like, where are you guys at on this topic?
So, and is this the professor that had to end up getting bodyguards?
Yes.
So do you have bodyguards?
I don't have bodyguards, no.
Not yet.
I think things are much more dramatic in the UK than they are here.
Yeah, because I've seen a very cool photo of her walking around with her bodyguards.
So one of my colleagues told me today she described herself in Unheard. Did you see this? As a cut price Kendall Roy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I got Succession vibes when I saw that photo.
It's pretty great.
But that really goes to show, like, obviously academics like yourself who are discussing these issues. And like you said, it's not necessarily a part of the discipline of political philosophy. It's just a broader topic that comes into that.
Yeah.
But when you start discussing these issues as an academic, there is consequences in today's society.
Yeah, there absolutely are. There might be two things there. So one is like just being a person who works on issues in the culture wars. People have such strong feelings that it's very easy to like say the wrong thing and then sort of attract a lot of attention. And I think that's probably what happened to Rebecca Tuvell. So I don't know if you've heard about her. Okay, she was a philosopher in the US. She wrote an essay in a sort of very well-respected mainstream feminist philosophy journal, but she argued for transracialism on the grounds of its similarity to transgenderism. And it just caused this huge international firestorm because various communities read it as like, even though she was saying we should accept transracialism because we accept transgenderism, lots of people heard it as, well, transracialism is obviously absurd, therefore we should reject transgenderism. Yeah. But she was just someone like that happened to stumble in, I think, to like a very heated issue, and maybe she wouldn't have expected the reaction that she got. But the other thing that can happen too is that even within the academy, there are these norms about like who should be working on certain things, and that's very much like, you might see it with Indigenous issues here, like it's more accepted or more appropriate for the people working on those topics to themselves be Indigenous. Okay. Or you want trans people to be doing transgender studies and lesbian, Yeah. So for all the minority communities, they should sort of be like speaking for themselves and representing themselves. And that's maybe a great rule for politics, but it's a bit strange when you bring it in as a rule to the academy. So it feels to me like you get extra levels of negative reaction or toxicity when you're a person not of a minority group doing work relating to a minority group. And that might be why this kind of feminist philosophy that I do, which interacts with trans issues, is like seen as so controversial.
Yeah, okay, I understand that. I mean, that might explain some of the criticism that just general members of the public get when they speak about trans issues. A lot of the times people will say to me, you don't really know what it feels like to be trans. You don't really know what it feels like to, have gender dysphoria or whatever it is, right? But like you said, it helps, at least for an academic, to be able to discuss this issue from an academic perspective.
Right.
And we are seemingly losing that if what you're saying is that only trans people, for instance, or trans academics have the authority to discuss these issues. Is that kind of the... Is that the brick that a lot of academics are hitting now in these universities?
I think so. And again, I think sociologically you can kind of understand it. Like, what a strategically interesting power move of feminists in the second wave to be like, oh no, women have a special and unique standpoint. So only women can understand women's experience. So you better hire lots of us.
Yeah. I mean, is there
clever?
Is there professors or educators or academics who are men who talk about feminism, for example?
Yes, but it was fraught at the time. There was someone at Monash, for example, back in the sort of 70s, 80s teaching feminism, and it was highly controversial that he was teaching that class. And again, because I think one of the political moves to get more minority representation in to the academy was to kind of lean into this standpoint type claim that like you have to be of the group to theorize the group or to really understand the group. And that idea is just kind of carried on today to all sorts of minority groups. And there is some discomfort when a person outside the group works on the topic. Some people do it, but you often see them being like excessively differential and virtue signally and making sure they've consulted and don't have any independent thoughts of their own. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I kind of know what you're talking about. But, as a woman,
Yeah.
right? You are a woman.
Yeah. Guessing my gender identity.
I can ask you that tricky question. What is a woman? Do you have an answer for it?
I would say an adult human female.
Right.
Yeah.
In your capacity as
Typical turf answer.
but in your capacity as a woman,
Yeah.
most recently you attended a rally. And that rally, of course, I was there as well in my capacity as an independent journalist covering it.
I was actually standing right behind you.
You were behind me?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
You kept swinging your camera around. I didn't know who you were, but I knew that there was a filming guy there.
Yeah. And of course, that's kind of become controversial in our community for lots of different reasons.
Yeah.
And I've kind of witnessed many aspects of it. I think in terms of what a lot of people would associate that with is what happened to Moira Deeming, who was a member of Parliament of the Victorian Liberal Party, who has since been, ejected from her party for attending that rally.
Yeah.
You attended that rally as your capacity as a woman, but then, of course, you've also faced some sort of professional I don't know how to term it. Would it be professional harassment or consequences for being there at that rally? What's that like as a woman going to these type of rallies and then knowing that, whether it's yourself, Moira Deeming, or other women that were there, and I think there were a few other women that might have faced some consequences from their workplaces. What's that like today in today's society, that women that go to these rallies can get tarred and then have impacts in their professional and personal life?
Yeah. First of all, let me say thank you for being there, because I think your footage and what would you call it, like testimony, was really helpful in the immediate aftermath. The fact that you were a kind of impartial party, like you're not there as a rad femme, obviously, and you're not fully invested, I take it, in the Posey Parker cause or movement. And the way you sort of walked between the different groups really helped to show the distance and the different groups that were there. And we kind of really needed that while we were being accused of having these various affiliations and associations. I know a lot of us were directing people manically to your Facebook footage. So thank you.
Yeah. And just to make it clear, I wasn't there because I had some connections with the women's rights group or all this kind of stuff. I actually saw that there was going to be this counter protest, and I've been covering protests for a long time now. And I was like, okay, this counter protest, this group's coming. I'm just going to go there and film what's going to happen.
Right.
But obviously, we all know what happened afterwards. But sorry to cut you off. You were saying
no. Otherwise, I would just answer the question you actually asked, which was, what's it like being a woman who went to an event like that? It's absolutely surreal that in 2023 you can attend a women's rights event on your own time and in a personal capacity, and then face not just kind of minor reprisals like some negative social media attention, but genuine threats to your employment, and by that I mean serious kind of complaints coming in that your employer takes seriously. And I've heard all sorts of absolutely I know of some cases where, people have actually lost their positions, been pushed out of businesses that they started, faced internal kind of investigation and complaints procedures that haven't been made public. It's just I don't know any other word for it than surreal. And I don't understand. I'm still trying to get my head around exactly what it is that the employers even think is their business in a way. I mean, with Moira, at least I can understand that is all just political football, right? So I guess there's just going to be complicated reasons why that person gets an advantage out of...
Of course, there's political opportunism in those aspects,
Exactly. So, but with a university, you would expect a certain set of principles to be governing the decision-making. Do we have any right over a person's private life? Do we want to be sanctioning people for political activity in their own time? Do we hate women? Are we sanctioning feminist activism?
Yeah.
Are we interfering in open, heated public debates?
Yeah. Because following your attendance, I think the dean of your university put out a statement, not particularly naming you, but condemning whatever happened at the rally.
Yeah.
And that, I guess, in a way led to students at your university targeting you or activists targeting you. Is that kind of the...
Yeah, I mean, of course, we can't quite establish the causal chain, right?
Yeah.
So I can't say the dean incited a campaign against me, but there's certainly stepwise correlations where he sent out a very strongly worded denouncing type email, of this event that happened off campus and had nothing to do with the university. And by the way, I'm the only member of the entire university community that was there or that was known to be there.
And is it common for Melbourne University to be condemning like what's happening at protests? I haven't really seen that. I haven't really seen that before.
Yeah, no.
I mean, they didn't condemn lockdown protests and all this kind of stuff. So they've taken a particular stance for some reason.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's very uncommon, and it was very surprising, and in a way surprising because so unprofessional, but in another way not surprising at all because trans activists are, I don't want to say insane, like the activists that take up this cause as their project, mostly not trans, by the way, mostly sort of white knight, privileged, usually white students taking up this cause as their like desperate moral project.
There's a lot of white males as well. Like I don't want to judge because just from seeing the crowds at the protests,
yes,
there's a lot of young white males.
Yep.
There are females there as well, but a lot of white males.
Yep.
That are I don't even think they're trans as such, but they're there as allies.
That's right. That's what it looks like at uni too. There's been several protests over the last few years, kind of all orienting around me and trans issues, and that's been my perception too. And if you really look, you can maybe see like 3 gender non-conforming people who may or may not be trans. So it's really like it's not trans rights is not a trans movement, which is really, I think people don't know that. So they don't understand that it's like something else is going on here. It's a weaponizing of morality by some of the kind of but by some privileged people against other privileged people. It's a jockeying for status and position within a very elite class already. I don't know. It's bizarre.
I mean, look, the issue with the women's rights rally, I guess it comes down to not the fact that there was a women's rights rally. It was the fact that there were these neo-Nazi elements or these far-right elements as portrayed by the media and even said by those they're themselves that kind of hijacked the rally and turned up for their own reasons in many ways to fight these other activists that they perceive as their enemies. Like that's how I view it.
But before we talk about that, what do you think would have happened in terms of the media reporting and the outrage around the issue if there had been no neo-Nazis? But Posey still comes out and says, no man has a vagina, no woman has a penis.
Yeah, look, it would still have been controversial.
Okay.
I think my personal perception is that because we had her in, I think, Hobart and Adelaide, I can't remember, but in a few other states where
Sydney.
It was still covered
Yeah.
as an issue of controversy for her views.
Yeah.
But I think the element of having these kind of far-right Nazi gate crashes
Right.
really helped the media dramatize it.
Yeah.
And really helped the people that are against what Posey Parker and who are against what the women's rights group stands for instance. It helped them, it galvanized them to say like, look, these people who are advocating for women's rights, they are far-right Nazis as well.
Yeah, I see.
I mean,
do you think it would have gotten some coverage, but nowhere near the like global outrage?
No, whenever these kind of these Nazi dudes show up, like, the media, I was there.
Yeah.
Like the media that were there
It's true.
did not care about what the women's rights people were saying.
Yeah.
As soon as those men showed up, they were there the whole time, just snapping photos and whatever angles they can get.
Yeah.
Like they're not really interested in your message.
Yeah.
To the extent, because that message that this is what I feel that the Women's Rights Rally group is sending out, they've already discounted that message anyway.
Yeah.
But now that these Nazis are here, it's like, wow, look, this is what these people are associated with. It's the same group. Like,
Yeah,
that's kind
right.
of the
It's
way
a gleeful opportunity.
that's kind of like, it's very
Yeah.
opportunistic.
Yeah.
And I think the trans rights activists are there, see it in that way as well.
Yeah.
It's like, look, you know, one of the chants that they always say is you got Nazis
Yeah.
on your side.
Posey Parker, you can't hide. You've got Nazis on your side.
Yeah. Okay. So, like, I guess that's why the universities, all these places kind of get involved. It's like, oh, we can use this thing to say that these people are also like XYZ or far right or Nazis and all this kind of stuff. But like for me, when I'm looking at the women there, and there's like grandmothers, there's like, you know, all sorts of different women.
Yeah. It's
And-
implausible.
Yeah, like these are not, you know, and I know it because sometimes they call me a far right white supremacist Nazi. So I know like it's all just nonsense, but they will play to it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, like, I think it's been so tainted now, this issue, where women's rights, and as someone who's a political philosopher, you might find this interesting, women's rights is now like a far right
Yeah.
position.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird? Like, it's a bit weird.
It's so weird.
Like, I don't think those neo-Nazis, like, they've said it on record anyway, but they don't really care about women's rights in that manner.
Of course they don't.
Not the way that a feminist or so on would advocate for women's rights, not in that manner whatsoever.
Yeah.
They might care about other things that are related to women and, you know, protecting the country and all this kind of stuff that they espouse, but it's not necessarily from the feminist standpoint that these groups have that view. Is that...
Oh, I'd be shocked if it turned out that the neo-Nazis were feminists.
Far-right feminists.
Yeah, that would be remarkable. Yeah. I mean, from what they themselves said, or at least the kind of leader of the National Socialist Network, it seemed that they only had a sort of vague conception of what the so-called TERFs like were actually about or even were.
Yep.
And it seemed like they maybe overestimated the size of the freedom protest, which was another group that were there. I think maybe they had my sense of what is it Sewell, whatever the leader's surname is. My sense of what he was describing was that he had this view of like the normies of Melbourne up against the like communist rabble.
Yeah.
That was his dichotomy of the goodies versus the baddies, or the normals versus the scum or whatever. And so he, I guess, saw their role as being to like somehow protect.
I think they use the word vanguard.
Vanguard, right.
Yeah.
But it was a vanguard not for radical feminists or gender critical feminists, but for the so-called normies, right? And I think once you get that sense of what they kind of had in mind, that really undermines this idea that like somehow the National Socialist Network really showed up for the TERFs.
Yeah.
It's just so insane.
Yeah.
And then, so there is this question coming back to the university, right? Of course, the political opportunism you can explain, the media coverage you can explain, but what explains the university jumping on this bandwagon where they're supposed to be this place of knowledge and inquiry and that confuses me.
Yeah, like typically I would never associate universities getting involved in this type of activism in Australia.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of common in the United States of America, also some of these universities, but Melbourne University, I haven't really seen them involve themselves in that manner.
And maybe like high level things, I know occasionally it'll be like there's a question of the university taking an institutional position, which I can kind of understand. Like it's a big institution, it's reputable, it has a noble history. Should it use its status to kind of come out on some big issue? So I think then that goes to academic board and it's voted on.
You mean like, for instance, if they took a position on the Voice to Parliament?
Yes, I think they have. I think they've come out on The Voice. They came out on gay marriage at the time. So that, like, you know, once in a blue moon, really big social issue, the university taking a position, I don't really mind that. I think there's a separate discussion about which kinds of institutions should be impartial. But I think maybe that's okay, especially if they make clear the institutional position does not constrain or determine any employee's decision, because they, of course, can't constrain our academic freedom. But that's very different to like the dean just feeling free to share his trans activism with the entire Faculty of Arts and basically not naming me, but singling me out as an individual who has kind of done this thing that needs to be denounced. That's bullying.
Yeah. And that ended up with, I think, signs being stuck around the university.
Yes.
People saying that if they take your class, they're like fascists or whatever.
Yes, that relates to your thesis about the neo-Nazi feminists, right? So
Yeah.
the claim was only a
'Cause
fascist takes
you
feminism.
have a feminist class that you hold.
Yes, so
And the impetus was that if people attend, that they're attending a fascist workshop.
exactly, yeah. But somehow I think they expressed that very badly. I think what they meant is because I'm a alleged fascist,
Yeah.
then you're taking my class, you're a fascist. But somehow the way they expressed that on the stickers and posters, only a fascist takes feminism,
That's right. That's what they said. Yeah.
made it seem like somehow feminism and fascism go hand in hand, which is absolutely absurd, to the point of probably helping the counter campaign more than them.
But you stood up for yourself in this instance.
Yes.
And you put in a complaint or a concern to is it
WorkSafe, yeah.
WorkSafe.
Yeah.
That's what it's there for, really, if you're feeling having these type of issues at work.
Yeah.
And what was the outcome of that?
That is ongoing. Yeah. And I think it will take a bit of time to resolve, but yeah, it's ongoing and I'm optimistic.
So as of now, you've had no professional consequences besides the treatment and the way that obviously it all panned out with what the students did and so forth after the dean put out the letter.
Well, the university has confirmed to the Age, I think it was, that there were disciplinary proceedings brought against me. So there was an investigation of my attendance and involvement in the rally, and there was an investigation of my social media associated with the rally, and I've been cleared on both counts.
Okay.
Yeah. So there have been some consequences, but no dramatic outcomes of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does it say about society, for instance? Like, okay, of course, Maura Deeming, she lost her position in the party.
Yeah.
And that's obviously very public, and there's defamation lawsuits involved and so on.
Yeah, as there should be.
As
Because
there
that
should
was
be, right?
absolutely insane.
Of course. I think she's put up a second defamation suit, I think, recently.
Oh, cool. Against someone else?
Against John Pacetto, I think, the same person.
Two against Pseudo.
I think, yeah, I'm not sure of the exact details, but there's two against him now.
Okay.
From her.
Cool.
And I think recently we also had a rep from the UN.
Yes.
On
Rima Salem.
on the rights of women, kind of say how women are being marginalized. Women who discuss their rights
Yes.
are being put into positions within their workplaces, which, obviously is risky for them almost to discuss their rights where they lose their employment.
Yeah.
Do you think it's fair what's happened to Maura Deeming and other women like her?
Not even remotely. Like, yeah. And I actually think she's
So what's the difference? Like, if, for instance, let's say that your university takes no action against you and they've cleared you.
Yeah.
They've cleared you of all this. You said they've cleared you because they've looked into it.
Yeah.
But then the same, Liberal Party, they've looked into it as well, and they've said, no, this person's a bad person.
Yeah,
How
but
does
I
it
think that is the difference between a workplace that's governed by principles and just brute politics, right? Because I think the university at least has to follow university procedures. It has a certain set of announced principles in place for like when it can bring disciplinary action. There would be a kind of international outcry, I think, if a university fired an academic on academic freedom grounds. Different if they've done something like illegal outside of work or whatever, or just come to class trashed all the time or something, right? But if it's something to do with their just expression of their research or whatever, that would just be unthinkable. But Moira's, she's in a worse position, right? Because politics is like that. It's whatever is expedient and whatever can get that guy some votes next time. And from what I've been hearing, it's like that whole thing just has really ridiculous explanations to do with Pseudo's re-election, and it's just
well, you didn't really have there's other females obviously in the Liberal Party. They haven't really spoken up besides a couple in her defense.
And some of them have acted against her.
Yeah, exactly. They've actually acted against her.
Yeah.
I think in your case, most recently, there was some academics and stuff that put forward in support of you. Was there I think 20 academics or so that came out in support, not particularly on your opinion or your view,
right,
but more so the right of an academic or a professor, for instance, to have certain political views.
Yeah.
And express
them. One thing that's remarkable about that, in a way, right? Okay, I don't want to seem ungrateful because I am really grateful that first of all, my colleague that kind of coordinated that. Second of all, I think in the current climate, it takes a lot of bravery to put your name to something like that, even though we only asked senior philosophers who were pretty safe. So in the circumstances we're in, that is brave. But I also want to point out, every academic should sign a letter like that. Like, that is, if you understand what a university is, what the role of a university is in the broader democratic society, what it means to accept an academic job, what your responsibilities are, the academic freedom it's such an important principle that governs university life. There should be no academic who would not sign a letter like that. So it's interesting to me, right? Because it's like I can simultaneously recognize that it's like really meaningful that those people were willing to step up on this in Australia in this climate. But it's also just really disappointing or revealing of what
You're saying it should be a default position.
it should be. There should be not even people who hate gender critical feminism with their whole hearts and think it's hate speech should still be willing to sign that letter, because that letter is just about universities protecting the freedom of academics to pursue their research in their own way. And that's what I'm doing. If you don't have the freedom to be wrong, even dramatically, offensively wrong, you don't have freedom. So yeah, I feel kind of conflicted about it, because it's like, yeah, it's great that it happened, but it also shouldn't have even needed to be said in a way.
Yeah. And I think that kind of, for me, when I think about what's happened to you, when I speak to a lot of my friends, especially female friends who are in professional workplaces, with a lot of stuff happening, particularly around children and how this relates to children as being parents, they're really worried about what they can say, how they can express themselves. So they have views, but they're not too sure how to express themselves.
Yeah.
Like you said, at the university, academics may be protected in a different way to what politicians are protected.
Yes.
But when you kind of narrow it down to the everyday person, and you're in a workplace where, your boss can potentially fire you, and no one's really going to make a, big issue of it because you don't have that position or that recognition from the media, or you're not really a part of that system.
Who can you tell? Yeah.
Who do you tell?
Yeah.
So for that reason, a lot of people are worried to actually discuss this issue.
Yeah.
They have views, whether that's going to the primary school and discussing certain views about what's being taught, whether that's something that's impacting them in the workplace, some changes that are happening in their workplace. How do people navigate this now? Because I'm finding, even for myself, discussing this can sometimes, I feel bad sometimes discussing it, because there is this kind of play happening in my mind where I understand that I should be advocating for the rights of people and, allowing people to have big choices in their life. But then I also understand that, the rights of women and the rights of men, the rights of parents are all distinct in some way.
Yeah.
And they should be respected as such. So having that complex for me is hard, because sometimes I feel like I am potentially being bigoted or whatever they're claiming when I say that this person doesn't belong in this space. How do people navigate this today and, find a path forward to actually discuss this issue? Because I think the window of being able to discuss this issue is narrowing.
Yeah.
And the decisions for us are actually being made by government, whether it's through legislation, and, I feel like things are being steamrolled through.
Oh, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely
the window of opportunity to actually have a robust debate about it in the community is disappearing.
Yeah. I mean, that's especially true in Victoria. They're putting up this new vilification legislation, and it's expected in the next, I think, year and a half at this point. And from what I gather, it will severely restrain or constrain people's ability to speak about these issues, at least on fear of some sort of charge of hate speech or vilification of trans people. So it's actually literally true that the window is closing. Get in quick. Yeah, I guess there's a couple of things in your question, right? One is like how to navigate this feeling of wanting to speak your mind but not be a bigot, right? And then the other thing is the practical matter of like how to start doing it in your own context.
Because I don't care. Like, I cop it online for having these views. and I'm happy to express them and take the errors or whatever it is, like whatever's being said to me.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, you yourself being going to these women's rights rallies, and a lot of the people that are involved in activism
Yeah.
of some sort, they don't mind
Yeah.
what usually happens in terms of what's said about them. But the everyday person usually would look at this and be like, I don't want to get involved in this.
They mind, yeah. No, I understand that. I guess at a certain point, though, maybe this is going to sound harsh, but like, we can't all be cowards, right? Like that, and I don't mean to like call a coward anyone who doesn't take action. I understand people have really complicated and good reasons for not speaking out when they feel uncomfortable or they know something's not right. But there's a collective action problem there, right? Like you can't all, I'm just going to put it in terms of like slavery, right? It's like you can't all just be slaves and hope someone else does the revolution, right? Like you have to get some people that are going to like do a violent overthrow for everyone else's benefit. And there's always like high first mover costs. So this person's really going to risk like just getting murdered in retaliation. That's, of course, it's rational not to be that guy, but someone has to be that guy, right? And others have to be the second ones, and others, you know, so that lesson, that sort of structure of how do we get out of a terrible situation when it's risky for the individual to act or to go first, that applies right now. So we're being told really forcefully that like this narrative around gender identity ideology, or that some would say gender identity theory, is true, can't be questioned. If you question it, you're unkind, you hate trans people, you don't want them to exist, you want them dead, blah, 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 right? So force down everyone's throat this idea that like you absolutely cannot ask questions about this, even if your questions are motivated by care for children, care for lesbian and gay youth, care for women, right? Wanting appropriate safeguarding. Oh no, all of that is just unkind and you're a bigot and you don't care enough about trans people. Someone is going to have to be willing to be unkind, right? And that's quote unquote unkind because it's just an accusation. But if no one's willing, then we just end up with that situation. So there's not really an alternative, right? It's like, so just who's it going to be? And I think that segues nicely to the question of the practical thing. How do we actually do it? Well, it has been my observation that like this fight to have this issue like put on the table as a serious conflict of rights between different groups, where it's not just unkind or bigoted to question any of the claims of trans activism, that fight has to be fought in every single workplace, every single school, every single city council, every single country's government. And it just has to be like negotiated to a point that like it's not plausible for the activists that try to shut everyone down to like be in the dominant position. And we, at least in Australia, have the luxury of watching the UK. We have the template because we've watched how they've done it and seen them claw every inch of it, right? Like, first of all, none of the left-wing press would ever say anything contrary to the trans narrative. And just tiny step by tiny step, super dogged women just constantly persisting. You see little cracks, and then like things, people come in, someone else gets braver because they're not the first one. Yeah, so I just think we're going to have to be brave. Like more of us are going to have to be brave.
And my eyes were really opened very recently to this issue. Like I've always obviously known about this in terms of watching what's happening overseas in America and the UK. But you know, going on about daily life here, I haven't really noticed the impact that it's having on people.
Yeah.
And the first time I really saw the impact that it has on people is what happened at that women's rights rally. And that's really what opened my eyes in terms of actually can impact people so adversely, and what these women are talking about in terms of safe spaces for them and the recognition of their rights in law seems very simple.
Yeah.
But it's being so complicated by this thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like the government of the day, certain corporations, you know, lots of institutions are happy to murky the waters.
Yeah.
Muddy the waters and confuse people about what this really is. You know, it's like on the surface, if you look at it, it seems to be about just, you know, people that don't like this group of people.
Yes.
You know, these people have bigoted views, they're far right, they're neo-Nazis, whatever it is, they just don't like trans people because they're just, hateful people. But when you actually look below that surface,
Yeah.
it actually has real world impacts on mainly women.
That's right.
And also children in a way,
Yep.
but mostly women because of the impact on workplaces,
Yep.
professional sports, for instance. And I know a lot of people it's just sports or whatever, but it has a real world impact.
No, I think it's one of the good cases.
Yeah, on people having aspirations, especially females having aspirations to be in professional sports, right? And then obviously on academics who are female. And then for me, it dawned on me that even my own partner, my wife, like it can have impacts on them if they want to be in a safe space.
Right.
As a woman, I get that. Like it took me a while to finally understand what that means. But I think a lot of people haven't crossed that over that side yet. Is what I'm trying to say.
I think that's right.
I was in a lull. I didn't really see. I saw it like as like this culture war issue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like this like in America, this crazy things happening and this
Right.
like all this kind of stuff.
But what's actually at stake is hard to understand. Yeah. And I think one problem there is that a lot of people hear women-only spaces as a refrain, and they just don't really know what that means. And the public mind, I guess, most prominently associates that phrase with bathrooms. And so then it's really easy for the person who's quite uninformed and just vaguely heard of this to think, oh yeah, there's this huge fight going on. Oh, this poor trans woman just wants to pee in peace. Yeah. And all these horrible feminists are saying that like he should get out of their bathroom or whatever, right? And so, yeah, I think you're right. Like you mentioned a number of these spaces that might matter. Single-sex hospital wards. There's this huge list. Your sports, your prisons, your single-sex domestic violence recovery groups, addiction groups. There's just this huge long list of things where we actually tend to offer that space or service to female people only. And if we change society such that we include in those spaces or services on the basis of gender identity as self-declared rather than sex, you have given away the possibility of a single-sex space for women. And that in each space, there's different things to talk about why that's bad or risky or what the harms might be of that or what the losses are. But there's this whole suite of really serious conflict cases, at least to be worked through. And it's really hard to get that fully on the public agenda.
Yeah, because I feel like we only really kind of get into these topics when we have these high-profile issues.
Yes.
Whether it's like a female athlete that's a high-profile athlete losing because some trans woman won.
Yeah.
Or whether it's something happened in a prison.
Yes, that will make the news.
Or whether it's I feel like this only ever becomes an issue, or even the people that debate this issue always brings up if this trans woman goes to a woman's only space and then does something bad in there.
Yeah.
Like if that happens, then it's like an issue.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like it's not an issue.
No, that's right. It's never discussed, but there's all these other things. Like one thing I think is really interesting is the single-sex schools question, right? It's not that like, if you let a trans girl or whatever, so a male person that identifies as a girl come into the school, or you let a number of people like that in, it's not a sexual predator issue, right? Maybe it is, like it could be, but there's a what are the goods that single-sex schools are supposed to serve? Why don't we just have mixed-sex schools? Okay, let's tell that story. What's the rationale? Okay, once you know that, you can ask, okay, what is it true that one boy coming in could damage that rationale? And then maybe you think, well, yeah, he'll sexually objectify the girls and that'll distract them, whatever the reason is why we have them. Okay, what happens if it's 10 boys or 50 boys or at what number? Or is it that any one, because of these issues to do with like risk or socialization or a certain sort of behavior, is it separating people that are like likely to distract one another on sex and romance grounds, whatever. I'm just saying you could write a whole paper separately about just that one space, single-sex schools, and try to figure out what the issues are for admitting on the basis of gender identity rather than sex. And as you say, the issues are not just physical safety. Like there's a whole range of other interests that women can have in having spaces that are just shared with people of the same sex. Maybe they've had the same kind of bodily experiences. So something like the domestic violence recovery group is a good example. Like a man could experience domestic violence in a gay relationship, and we could still think that we want to have women-only domestic violence recovery groups. And these are interests that are not like, oh, well, if you let a man in, he might punch her. No, he already punched her. The point is to have a space that those people aren't in. So yeah, there's heaps of complex issues there. And again, it's just hard to figure out how do you get the public discussion really going around all of those complexities.
Yeah. One point that I see being made by men a lot online is that, oh, this is all the feminists' fault anyway. They deserve this. This is all they're doing. You know, what do you say about that? And I think what they're trying to say is that, you know, you, the feminists. Are you a feminist?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Yeah, I am.
So you guys, you girls, were the ones who were instrumental in kind of changing the dynamics in the West in terms of, you know, the position of women in society.
Yeah.
You know, taking away the position of men in society from certain workplaces or things like this. And it's happening to you now. Like you have kind of been instrumental. I'm not saying you, but you know what I'm trying to say? Like feminists have been instrumental in kind of creating this disharmony.
Yeah.
And this is just an extension of that. This kind of other extreme, another more extreme version of this types of ideologies where now it's about, you know, trans rights.
Yeah.
Is that fair, that criticism that people make about feminists?
I think I'm still trying a bit to understand the exact claim. So one claim I can see in there is that like feminists set up this dynamic of like
they say like, oh, because women vote. That's another one I hear a lot. It's because women vote and they've voted for stuff like same-sex marriage, or they've been very kind of liberal in their views.
But I don't understand how this is supposed to explain, because what we want is the shape of a thing where what feminists demanded or asked for women is now symmetrically showing up with trans, right? Or at least with certain minority groups. So I was thinking one thing we definitely did set up is like this idea of the dominant or the privileged, and then that a minority group can be coming in like asking for certain concessions or asking to be included. I think that has the same structure because that's what the trans activists will say. Oh, now women have their rights. Women are the dominant. Trans women are the minority, and trans women are knocking at the door of privilege asking to be included.
That's what they're kind of trying to say. I think that's kind of what I probably explained it in a bad way, but I think that's what they're kind of trying to say.
Okay.
I don't agree with it. I'm just saying like this is kind of what I see sometimes where feminists are being blamed for this entire situation. And
I mean, that I think like if it were true that women had fully achieved equality and become the dominant and trans women were uncontroversially a minority group, that probably would be fair to say. And then if men were just pointing out the hypocrisy of women wanting to get in when they're the minority, but not wanting to let the next minority in once they're the dominant, that would be a good critique, right? Like, don't be a hypocrite.
Yeah.
But I guess what I would say as a feminist is like, it's completely unclear that women have actually achieved equality such that we should classify them as the dominant social group. And it's not clear to me at all that trans women, considered as the whole class of people who are men claiming to be women, count as marginalized. And I know that's absolutely like verboten to say on the left. You're supposed to be, suicide rate through the roof, constant murders. But it's just not true when you look into it. So yeah, I think you have some very vulnerable people and you also have some extraordinarily entitled people. And it's not clear how you should categorize that very heterogeneous group as a minority group.
Yeah. You know, I look at the rest of the world. Let's forget about the West for a second. Whether I look at parts of Asia or Africa or Latin America, for instance, there are places there where they're not as progressive, I would say, as the West in many ways, but they're not having these type of issues that we're having in our society. But the rights in those countries for people who are gay and lesbian might be less.
Yeah.
So is this just a natural part of progress when we kind of progress in our societies in the West, that we have to deal with these issues now where people have saying that, you know, we're trans and this has to be recognized. And, you know, you do have people who possibly, you know, not you as an academic, but there are academics who support this.
Yeah.
And there are scientists who support this. And there is that backing of institutions that support this. So it's just a natural progress in progressive societies that we have to deal with this. And then in many ways, what we're seeing today is we have to accept it.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because that narrative in some sense presupposes that there just are a lot of like almost like innate features of persons where there's a certain priority ordering. As a society becomes more progressive, we sort of take their issues seriously. And that does fit the narrative of history. It's like, oh, like race, like civil rights, oh, women's enfranchisement, oh, gays. Like, but these are all real features of persons, right? So the question is that the narrative for trans? Is it that they really are just the next civil rights movement, which is what a lot of the left want you to believe? Or is it that like, so I think this is a hypothesis about like what happened to Stonewall in the UK or whatever. Is it that once you get a certain amount of flourishing and in a good society, you've got all these institutions purpose-built to struggle for moral causes. They just manufacture one if there isn't one. And so the question for me, I guess, would be like, is this a real minority group issue that really needs its rights and it's part of that natural historical struggle? Or is this a manufactured, like socially constructed group where these institutions like Stonewall that are bored now that gay marriage went through and ACON in Australia now get a new purpose so that they can keep their institutional goal up and no one has to get fired and they can raise funds and everyone feels, these privileged kids I talked about earlier on, they feel a sense of purpose because they're fighting for trans rights. Like, well, that guy in Oxford recently, no more dead trans kids on his T-shirt.
This is the one that glued themselves.
Exactly, but there's been, from what I saw on Twitter, one dead trans person in 8 years in the UK.
Yeah.
What's he fighting for? So I think I'm just saying there's this question about that logic.
Yeah.
Whether that's a real cause or not. And I think I have quite a bit of skepticism about whether it's a real cause.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it feels manufactured. That's my personal view on it.
Yeah.
In terms of the outrage that's around it and the fact that it is so in your face.
Yes.
Now, like, personally, I don't care what people do. I don't care what they say they are. I don't care about, if people are gay and lesbian. Like, it doesn't, I'm like happy with everyone being everything that they want to be. Like, I want that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm happy with that world. Like, it's not a problem for me. But there is this constant reminder now to all of us, there's, I think this month is the first day of Pride Month, for instance, like in the US.
I didn't even know.
But it goes for a month.
Yeah.
And then, we had like the Pride March a few weeks ago. And then we had, the Idbot or
Ida Hobbit. Trans
yeah.
Day of Visibility.
I reckon they need a better name. That's like
It's a terrible.
That's not a good naming convention. But like there's all this stuff to make this issue visible.
Yeah.
But I feel like in society, most people they don't care to the extent of not wanting those people to have the same rights as everyone else.
Yeah.
I don't feel like we live in that world anymore. Like, it's not a constant thing that people speak about, like, oh, that person's gay or that person's lesbian, that person's trans.
Yeah.
I don't see those conversations happening out in the real world. People are just getting on with life. And they're okay with people being different and all this kind of stuff. But it's being put in front of us all the time, like people are doing something wrong.
Yes.
Or that we're meant to be doing something different, or we're meant to be wearing like rainbow colored tops all the time or something. Like, I don't understand like where this is coming from, but like you said, it's coming from somewhere.
Agreed. Yeah.
But in society, I'm not seeing it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one big problem is that it wasn't before a feature of corporations to like differentiate themselves on the market for moral reasons.
Yeah.
We just seem to be in this age of moralism for some reason. I don't know, someone different to me who works on that stuff could explain that, right? But somehow we're just...
Oh, look, they're virtue signaling, because if you look at these corporations, I mean, Twitter's a great example. You look at their Middle East page or something, they wouldn't dare like espouse those views. They're not as courageous as they portray themselves.
Right. But why, I guess my question is like, why is this, or at least in the West, why is this something that people reward now? because in the 60s they're not doing this. That it's not like, oh, I support abused animals. We Coca-Cola, right? Like,
Yeah.
so there's just this era now where everyone is obsessed with like their moral purity and showing what moral causes they care. There's moralism. I don't know why. I heard someone say recently they think that has shifted from the right to the left, that it used to be really a kind of more religious focused purity and kind of morality centered around religion, and the left used to kind of despise that, and now it's the left that are doing it and the right despising it.
Yeah. I mean, there is a religious aspect to a lot of this events which are happening related to this. I don't want to use the word cult, but it just does feel a bit religious.
Yeah,
in
right.
terms of the way that people want to display things.
Yeah.
Like have symbols. There's a lot of this happening, and we're a bit more in terms of religion in Australia, at least, it's a bit more secular.
Yeah.
It's not something we publicly pronounce like, oh, I'm a Christian. It's not necessarily done. But today, there is this thing of saying, or even for companies, it might have been in the past, they would have said, we support Catholics, or, they might have had some displays during
Right.
Easter or something.
Right.
But instead of doing that, they do
this other stuff now.
we're for pride.
Maybe, yeah. I guess I'm still in search of a good explanation of like why and why now. Yeah. But it's definitely part of explaining what I think of as oversaturation. Like we've previously fought for minority groups' rights, but it hasn't just been like this constant hammering from every source. Every TV show now will have that character. Every shop window has the flag. Every company, like it's just like, shut up. And you're risking backlash. I think lots of people.
And you're saying this as a
lesbian. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think people in the lesbian and gay community are fearful actually that this oversaturation in our name, right, which is actually about T, but it always goes under the LGBTQIA plus inclusion initiative stuff. It's only about T, but it's using our name. It's going to cause people to just get so fed up that there'll be a backlash against lesbian and gay rights.
Well, I'm seeing that backlash against lesbian and gay rights in other parts of the world.
Right.
They're using what's happening in the West as an example and saying,
right.
Especially I think in parts of Africa or Uganda and stuff, I've seen a bit of this where they're saying that, look what's happening there.
Right.
We gave them marriage rights and equality, and see how far they've taken it now.
Yeah.
So I think there is that kind of possibility that it's going to impact other parts of the world.
Yeah.
In terms of those rights progressing in a quicker manner.
Yeah. I mean,
which is sad.
Such a shame. Yeah. It's such a shame. And I guess then it makes it really important to answer this question of like whether that really is just the next minority group. Because then, in a sense, those countries would be right to worry about the slippery slope, right? But if it isn't, if it's manufactured, and if it really does stop at gay rights, right? Like that, now everyone's good. Like if you can really you protect your racial minorities, you protect your women, you protect your gay and lesbian people. We're finished now.
Yeah.
That's done. And we don't keep expanding forever into furries and kinks, and that's just, we're done now.
Yeah, there has to be a ceiling of some sort.
Yeah,
it doesn't
I think
go on
so.
forever.
Yeah.
And maybe like in America, it's hitting the ceiling because we've seen recently with Bud Light,
yes,
Target, these woke corporations, I would say, that really try to capitalize on a lot of this, getting a bit of pushback from people.
Yeah.
And they're losing billions and billions of dollars.
Yeah.
Do you think in Australia that boycotts and this kind of thing is really impactful, or we're not really at that stage?
I think we're not at that stage.
We're not there.
Yeah.
But is it something that needs to be done? Or is it more of an organic thing that happens as a response?
I guess it will. Yeah, I think it probably is more organic. Like people get fed up with the ideology, and then you get a sort of more spontaneous, like the comments section on an article goes crazy, right? The usual garbage, pushing the usual left-wing narrative at people about inclusion, but suddenly the comments section is just full of pushback. Okay, great. Right. So I think that's how people start fighting each other on social media. Someone in a workplace connects with someone else and they feel brave enough to speak to the boss. And then I think, then when the brand tries to do that next move, you just get a big social media off to it.
Yeah. Did these brands do this for feminists back in the day?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
I don't know
I don't know of examples, but I would not be surprised at all
if they did.
to hear that they did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you can imagine it, right? Like Eminem supports the Equality Act. Or
Yeah. So I guess on the topic of feminism, because you're a feminist and I've got you here.
yeah.
It's a bit of a mystery to me as well.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not saying that because I'm a guy and I don't respect women, all this kind of stuff. It's more so around the fact that my introduction to feminism was really around a group of feminists, like these kill all feminists. Are you one of them?
Kill
all men. Kill all men. Kill all men.
Kill all feminists. What?
Kill all men feminists. Is that the group you're from or no?
No.
No. What is that group?
I'm not even totally sure what you're referring to. I know there was a hashtag for
I don't know. I just ran into a few back in the day. This is in the early 2000s. That's kind of the fad that's finished.
I mean, there certainly was in the second wave a kind of just live debate going on about the redeemability of men.
Yeah.
So there was this kind of question like,
Do we need them?
are they a disease, right? Like, and, sorry, to put that more seriously, I think the thought was like, is something like rape or domestic violence or domination and control biological? Is it a kind of like, it's testosterone or it's our evolutionary history? Because if it's biological and irredeemable, then the only utopia or the only place where women truly achieve liberation is a place without men. And that either means kill all men or full secession into another country of women only.
Yeah.
And there were these explorations of both of those ideas, of course.
Okay, but it's not a mainstream thing.
It certainly wasn't ever mainstream. And actually the one feminist who really did kind of advocate violence against men, which was Valerie Solanas, she was kind of she was both an icon and really heavily reviled. So again, extremely controversial status, also sort of like mentally not well and institutionalized and, so a complex character.
Yeah.
But it certainly wasn't that like all feminists just embraced her.
Yeah.
There were big fights among even the most prominent feminists at the time over whether they should denounce her and distance themselves from her or support her and kind of take her up as a hero.
Yeah.
I don't think that's ever been a common view. I did hilariously read this book that was like a collection of essays from women active in the second wave. And it was just like normal women who'd been involved in feminism. And obviously a man had read the book because every hateful sentence against men, like feed your boy children glass, was underlined. So I read it with this experience of the man's point of view on these comments.
Yeah.
And of course that's interesting, right? Because politically, sometimes groups that have experienced marginalized groups like women who have experienced rape and domestic violence and worked in the sex industry and been really instrumentalized, they might hate men, right?
Yeah.
And they might be generalizing from a small group to the whole, but their political speech in expressing themselves is something other women might read differently to how a man might read it.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
I understand, yeah.
So it's not totally clear what it
Look,
really means.
I wasn't like too concerned that they really meant what they were saying, but that's my first introduction to feminism.
Okay.
Was that because growing up, like, coming from a South Asian background, from Sri Lanka, like feminism is not something that's kind of discussed in our families. And you know what I mean? Like, it's not really something that's a part of the cultural discussion.
Okay.
Like women are a major part of the family. Like my mom, my grandmother, like, I see them run their families. Like they are like the matriarch or whatever. They're like the heads of the household and everyone kind of bows down to them in that aspect.
Yeah.
But obviously there's maybe not as many rights for women in our countries when it comes to the workplace.
Right.
And things like
more
this.
strong gender roles.
Yeah, exactly. Like, but in terms of religion, for instance, there's women in Hindu religion, for instance. Like it's always kind of been there, the role of women in a different way in the Southeast Asia, at least anyway. Okay. So for my introduction to feminism here, I noticed like a lot of girls or in my age group when they graduated from high schools or different schools they went to, they were a bit different after schooling, especially if they went to a women's school.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Do you think there is this kind of ideological thing where at some schools where women or girls become more, these ideas are put into their heads? in terms of these ideological views about the role of women and the role of men that we might not naturally have?
Well, I mean, I think that's
I don't know if it's a loaded question, but I'm just saying, like, I noticed a difference in them.
No, I think
at a
that's a
later
fine
stage.
observation to make. But I just think it's there's a sense in which it's almost like an ideological question, right? Because it depends. Do you think, like, what's your underlying view of what the world is really like? If you're a gender traditionalist, like you really think women and men are quite different, or you have faith and you think they're destined for complementary roles or whatever, then of course you're going to think the school that teaches them some version of feminism based on like the equality of the sexes, not just morally, but like real capacity wise, that looks like ideology to you, right? But conversely, if you think, yeah, like what lots of the feminist insights are actually true, and there has been this like lengthy cultural pushing of men and women into these like different roles and behaviors, and then pretending all of that is just natural or God's plan or whatever, then the schools are empowering women by telling them the truth, right? So do you see what I mean? It really depends what your underlying view about the relation of the sexes is on whether you think that stuff is ideology and indoctrination into a false system of beliefs or enlightenment and freedom.
Yeah.
Because you now understand that the gender roles in the family you grew up in need not have been like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, of course, as a feminist, I tend to think those ideas are generally liberatory for women. Although I think your point about, well, maybe you didn't quite say this, but the theory can tend to be like overused is maybe not quite the right word, but it can be used to the exclusion of other theories or understandings of dynamics of advantage and disadvantage. Yeah. So, you could meet your like Australian white 18-year-old girl that's just learned about feminism, and she might like be, don't be pushy with me on a date because men always expect sex and women are always expected, right? So no. But then she doesn't understand what white girls tend to do to men of color. Right? So she has one framework for understanding advantage, disadvantage, but she hasn't put that together with all of the necessary frameworks, or she's concentrated much more on her role as the oppressed without also grappling with her role as oppressor in some systems. And so then you can get a bad analysis, right? And I think maybe this was actually the best analysis of what happened in that, that dog park case in the US? No. Last year or the year before?
The guy that was walking the dog and there was a lady there, they were yelling at each other.
Exactly. Yeah. And somehow I remember reading some analysis of that where it was like people read that through a race-based lens because America's more obsessed with race. Yeah. So, oh my God, a white woman called the police on a black man, putting his life at risk.
The bird watcher, yeah. He's got a job now. He's got a job with National Geographic.
Has he?
On a TV show or something, bird watching.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
but the thought was that the missing view was that a woman was approached by a man in the park alone and he threatened her dog who was there to protect her. And so if you're reading that case through a race lens or through a feminism lens, you're going to have a very different view of who the threatening actor was.
Yeah.
And I just think that lesson applies very generally to life.
Yeah.
That we can, overuse our favorite theories.
I get that. That's a good way of looking at it. And when the reason I brought up all this stuff with feminism and ideology and the school system is really around the fact that feminists across the board on this, all on the same side in terms of defending these women's base spaces and women's rights.
Yeah, that's one of the most like possibly shocking aspects, I think, of the current situation is that a lot of feminists, and I would say probably most, like high most, don't think there's a problem. So feminism has had this trajectory of really becoming more and more inclusive. I think that was the value that was really driving the change. But bringing more and more people and more issues in. So in my view, what you've ended up with is like a global justice movement that calls itself feminism, but has nothing to do with women anymore. And that view, of course, has no problem with incorporating or even privileging and prioritizing the trans rights movement because it just cares about global justice. And that's one of the causes that it thinks is like the modern civil rights movement or whatever. So there are actually very few feminists who really see what's happening as a conflict of interest between two distinct minority groups, trans people and women. That's what I think is going on. There are very few feminists who actually even think it's acceptable to define women as female people. So they think that defining a woman in terms of her biology is essentialist and reductionist. Like, so just this, and the claims make no sense. But they've just kind of, these are these mantras that have been repeated for 40 years. And so now everyone believes them uncritically. No conflict of interest, no problem here. We shouldn't be talking about sex anyway. Trans women are women. Trans rights are human rights. These TERFs need to stop talking.
That blows my mind. Like, it really confuses me. That's not what I expected. Like, I thought it was like across the board. Most feminists would be like, oh, not outraged, but at least advocating,
recognizing
to protect certain rights that they've fought for
for
so long.
No, and it's just been this long, I don't know if one should call it an accomplishment because I don't know if it was deliberate. I don't have a sense from my research or work that anyone kind of saw things coming and aimed at that. I don't have a sense that like the feminist movement was infiltrated and then like taken over. I think there were just these various like probably female socialized impulses to be kind, to be inclusive. And those impulses, they didn't quite throw them off before doing the project. And so they were vulnerable. And somehow just unfortunately those feminine traits have like led to a political movement that has a high proportion of like doormat types. And then of course you that's not an effective, focused, narrow movement. It's not a movement that says no. I unfortunately, it's a minority of feminists today that are really like fighting on this issue. And it's so insane because if you think about, like, even if those women don't care about trans issues and these conflicts of interest we care about, like as radical feminists, they surely care about something like pornography as hate propaganda against women. That's surely an issue that like all feminists can have something to say about, right? Like, is it in fact, helpful educational material for improving people's sex lives, or is it a form of group defamation against women or setting women up as objects? You can't have that discussion if you don't know who the women are. You literally can't. And then what's your story like when you want to tell feminist history? So who were the ones that didn't have the vote? Oh, really? People who identify as women, right? So there's all the stuff they should need to say to tell their own story politically, and they can't even tell it anymore because they have no words and concepts left.
I mean, that's what shocks me because I think it's Chris Hipkins, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. He had a really hard time trying to define what a woman was. And when I was looking into this, I was like, oh, well, New Zealand was one of the first countries to give women the right to vote. And that was like maybe like, let's say 100 years ago. I'm not sure of the exact time frame, but it doesn't seem that long ago that these rights were won for women. And it's the ongoing battle as well. And across all around the world, it's an ongoing battle still for women to have some of the rights that we have in the West.
Absolutely.
But now I'm seeing women give up some of these rights. Like you're saying, some of these feminists, they're happy to be inclusive. And I get all that stuff about inclusivity and I understand it, but they're giving things away. Sometimes very deliberately. But the allies that the women's rights movement has today is more broad, isn't it? Like there's men now who are stepping up in terms of advocating on behalf of them. Like for me, I see myself when I'm talking about women's rights, I'm not a woman. I get that. But I'm speaking on behalf of advocating for my partner, for instance. When I raise these issues, like that's on the back of, in the front of my mind. Or my mom, that's in the front of my mind. Is that something that's welcomed in the movement, that there's men or these other groups now or political groups that are kind of coming in to stand besides women's rights. I think
Yeah.
sometimes people view it as, these groups are trying to take advantage of an issue.
Oh,
You know what I mean? Like when I speak about women's rights, sometimes people will say to me, "Oh, Rukshan, you're just talking about women's rights because you don't like trans people."
Oh,
Like,
I
it's like a
see.
wedge
They
issue
want to
for-
give you an
It's like
ulterior
a
motive.
wedge issue for you because that lets you demean these people that you don't like for whatever reason.
But isn't that revealing that, like, as though you couldn't possibly actually care about women's
Yeah,
rights?
well, that's what I mean. Like,
That's really
I think
interesting.
most men care about their partners. They
Yeah.
care about their moms. They care about women as a natural instinct in
Yeah.
their life.
Yeah.
So isn't it only natural then for them to kind of say,
Yeah.
we want our women to be safe?
Yeah.
And is that welcomed within these movements, or is it like a bit of a complex issue? Like who speaks for women
I don't think
on this issue?
I don't think it's that complex because the liberal feminist movement, which is the mainstream form of feminism, they kind of went feminism is for everybody long ago, like in the 80s, 90s. So they have been welcoming men all along. And again, like I said, it's just a global justice movement now. So if you care about justice, you're welcome.
Yeah.
There's the gender critical feminist movement, I think, is slightly more selective in the sense that it has a large proportion of rad fems and it's picking up a lot of like rad fem history and taking it forward. And so some of us will want to say, well, men can't be feminists, but they can be allies. That's because you have a conception of feminism as like a movement for women's collective self-determination. Okay, so right, if men aren't women, then they can't be feminists. Still, we want allies, right? So the distinction there is only between like what you're calling the men. It's not about whether men's support or help isn't welcome.
Yeah.
I guess I would say
Because there's like this, like, there might even be this perception like, oh, these feminists, they can't deal with this issue. They can't do it. They're letting it go. Like they're not winning this issue, for instance. Then does it become an issue for all of society? You know what I mean? Like it's like if you're not stepping up to the plate to defend these rights, defend, children's rights or females' rights in certain environments, then does it become an issue for everyone?
I mean, it's interesting, right? So what should we say in the case that no woman cares about sex-based rights? Like, if no woman cared and all women thought trans women are women and there's no conflict here, I guess it would be weird if men were like, no. Like, I know what feminism needs. And then launched a women's rights movement that no woman wanted. Like, that would be weird, I guess. And it's like, it's probably slightly strange for me to concede that because there's a sense in which I am that man, right? By which I mean, a lot of women don't think there's an issue and they do think, trans women are women and they're welcome. And me and 20 other gender critical feminists or whatever, I'm slightly under guessing, but we are trying to say to them, you're completely wrong about what you need and what's good for you, right? So there's a sense in which that swaggering in and telling a huge group of people they don't know what they need, like the gender critical feminists are doing that. But still, there seems to be something slightly different to that and men doing it on their behalf. There's something more paternalistic there, or that it's kind of interesting. Definitely, the issue of telling someone they don't know what's good for them is there in either case. But I guess if we think like minority group politics are about the group being the ones who really know what they need, you have to have at least some of that group saying that that's what they need or want. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Just to kind of end our conversation, I know we've diverted a little bit from where we started. Where do you see, like the stuff that I'm seeing today, I couldn't have imagined it 5 years ago.
Oh, yeah, no. It's wild.
Where are we going to find ourselves in 5 years from today?
I think in 5 years, no one knows what non-binary is. I honestly think this gender obsession, it's a fad. I think it's just so embarrassing and narcissistic and like everyone just really like obsessing about themselves. Like, oh, my sense of masculinity. Oh, so boring, so uncool. Like I think it's just going to be one of those fashionable things that just passes quickly. And I think what's really interesting about that is whether when it passes, it leaves the original real group of people who in the 60s we would have called transsexuals, right? They get to reclaim their movement, which has just been subject to a hostile takeover by this bizarre 90s style transhumanism, postmodernism, gender self-curation theory nonsense. So is it like that nonsense descended upon a real minority group, took over, it made it insane, but then the storm lifts and there's just the real minority group left? Maybe. Or is it like the whole thing was kind of socially constructed all along, and when the insanity lifts, it sort of lifts all of it or almost all of it? Or what you have left is just people that acknowledge they have gender dysphoria, but they know what sex they are, and they're not making any claims to literally be the opposite sex, and they're not trying to use the spaces of the opposite sex. And we just have some sort of like sanity restored around the distinction between sex and gender. That's my best guess of where we're at in 5 years' time.
Okay. And that's considering that we didn't even really touch on some of the more serious aspects of this with some of the surgeries which are happening.
Yeah.
All this type of thing, which are not reversible.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole other topic that I don't really like to go into because I think it's very complex and it involves a lot of discussions around medical stuff that I don't really understand. But yeah, where I see this in 5 years, I have no idea, but I'm here for it. I think there's a lot more controversies to come related to this.
I think so too.
I think we are just kind of, on the verge of this becoming a really major issue in Australian politics, as it has been in the US and the UK.
Yeah.
And I think we really need really solid political leadership on this.
Yep.
Which is, for me, why I've, look at someone like Moira Deeming, who's not afraid to discuss these issues in the political forum as an important thing.
Yep.
And
hopefully she will just kind of flourish as an independent and be able to do something really interesting going forward.
And it's important that she keeps advocating for this type of thing because it is, whether we discuss this all we like in podcasts or on Twitter or wherever, at the end of the day, it's the people making legislation, making policies, which are going to determine a lot of these outcomes.
Yeah.
But yeah, Holly, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah.
And all the best. And hopefully you don't have any more trouble at the university.
We can all look forward to my Kendall Roy moment.
Yeah. If you ever have an issue where you have bodyguards around and stuff like this, let me know.
Make sure there's a paparazzi nearby.
Yeah, exactly. I can get a cool shot. Thanks so much, Holly.
Yeah.
Thank you.